Title: Tulpa. Chapter 1: The Creation. Adrian is a quiet, introspective man with few close relationships. Haunted by loneliness, he becomes deeply interested in the mystical concept of the Tulpa, a being created through intense mental focus, made real by sheer willpower and intention. The chapter delves into his motivations, exploring his isolation and desire for companionship. Adrian's initial excitement is slowly tempered by an uneasy awareness that creating life may be far more dangerous than he imagined. Scene 1: Discovering the Tulpa concept. Late night discovery. The story begins with Adrian sitting alone in his dimly lit apartment. It's late, and the world outside is quiet. The silence broken only by the hum of his laptop as he browses obscure forums and mystical websites. He stumbles upon a discussion thread on tulpas, thought forms brought to life by sustained mental effort. The concept captures him instantly, setting the mood and atmosphere. The room is shadowed, with only a faint, eerie glow from his computer screen illuminating his face. Adrian's apartment feels cold and empty, emphasizing his isolation. He's engrossed in the text on his screen, his eyes reflecting a strange excitement as he reads. The idea takes root. Adrian reads on, finding tales of ancient monks creating tulpas for companionship or protection, beings conjured solely through visualization and willpower. Some accounts warn that tulpas can develop minds of their own if given enough focus, a warning Adrian brushes off. The idea of creating his own companion, someone he can control yet rely on, fills him with a deep sense of fascination, hinting at Adrian's desire for control. Adrian feels powerless in his own life, often ignored by people and overlooked at work. The thought of creating a being he can control, one that exists solely for him, fills him with a sense of empowerment. It's a thrilling notion, a chance to leave his mark on reality. Scene 2: Obsession begins. Planning the tulpa. Adrian becomes consumed with the idea of creating his own tulpa. He buys journals and fills them with notes and sketches, detailing what he envisions: a woman who is kind and patient, a figure who will be both comforting and attentive. He spends hours visualizing her, giving her physical form and personality in his mind. Building the psychological horror. The more he plans, the more his mind becomes consumed with her image. He becomes fixated on her imagined details: her face, her eyes, the way her hair falls over her shoulders. It's almost as if she's already a part of his world, waiting to be released from his thoughts. The ritual begins. Adrian prepares a space in his apartment, clearing a corner of his living room and marking it with chalk. He arranges candles, meditating in the quiet, dim room with her image held firmly in his mind. He whispers her name over and over: Mira. His voice is steady, filled with both anticipation and a strange sense of dread, setting the stage for horror. The apartment feels colder, the shadows more pronounced. As Adrian whispers her name, it seems to echo in the silence, as if the walls are absorbing and holding on to his words. He feels a faint tingling in his spine, a small warning that he ignores, brushing it off as nerves. Scene 3: The first attempt. A sense of progress. Adrian spends weeks repeating his ritual, each session focused solely on Mira's presence. He closes his eyes, imagining her with increasing detail. The candlelight flickers, and he feels a strange energy building, a pulsing warmth that seems to radiate from the center of the room, hinting at something unnatural. In the stillness, Adrian feels as though he's no longer alone. The air seems denser, the shadows around him darker. For a moment, he thinks he sees something shift in the corner of his vision, a faint, nearly imperceptible outline. But when he looks, there's nothing there. An unexpected chill. One night, as Adrian finishes his ritual, he feels a sudden chill sweep through the room, a cold that seems to reach into his bones. The candle flames flicker violently, and for a split second, he sees something, a faint shadow in the corner of his eye. He turns, but it's gone. The room is silent, yet he feels as though he's being watched, building suspense and foreshadowing loss of control. The experience leaves him unsettled, but he pushes his unease aside, interpreting it as a sign that his tulpa is beginning to take shape. Despite his fear, he feels a thrill of anticipation, convinced he is on the verge of success. Scene 4. First signs of Mira. The first vision. After weeks of focused meditation, Adrian begins to feel Mira's presence more tangibly. He sees fleeting shadows in the apartment, dark shapes that seem to move just out of reach. At night, he dreams of her figure clear and defined, her face filled with an expression that feels strangely real, building an eerie, suspenseful atmosphere. Adrian wakes up from these dreams feeling both comforted and disturbed. It's as if Mira is truly with him, not just in his mind, but lurking in the shadows of his apartment. The line between his imagination and reality begins to blur. A whisper in the dark. One night as he's lying in bed, Adrian hears a faint whisper. He freezes, holding his breath, straining to listen. The voice is soft, almost inaudible, but he recognizes it immediately. It's Mira's voice, whispering his name. He closes his eyes, feeling both fear and excitement, wondering if he's finally brought her to life. Psychological horror and isolation. Adrian's heartbeat quickens as he realizes the implications. Mira, his creation, is now acting independently, speaking to him without his conscious effort. Part of him is thrilled, but a deep-seated fear begins to grow. He tells himself that this is what he wanted, but he can't shake the unease creeping into his mind. Scene 5. An unsettling encounter. Seeing Mira. A few days later, Adrian finally sees Mira fully for the first time. He's sitting in his living room, the lights low, when he catches sight of her reflection in a darkened window. Her figure is faint but unmistakable, a woman with dark eyes and an intense, almost predatory expression. She stands in the corner, watching him silently. Heightening the horror. Adrian turns to face her, but when he does, she's gone. He's left staring into the empty room, the silence pressing down on him. A shiver runs through him as he realizes that Mira is no longer confined to his mind. She exists outside of it, slipping in and out of reality at will. A growing fear. Adrian's fascination with Mira begins to give way to fear. He questions whether he has made a mistake, whether he has brought something unnatural into his life. The line between creator and creation feels blurred, and he senses that Mira may have thoughts and intentions of her own, setting up future conflict. Adrian resolves to continue his rituals, hoping that he can control her behavior, but in his heart, he feels a gnawing fear that Mira may not be under his control at all, that she has a mind and a will independent of his own. Scene 6. The first warning. A strange shift in behavior. Over the next few nights, Mira's presence grows stronger. Adrian begins seeing her more frequently, catching her reflection in mirrors and glass surfaces around his apartment. She appears when he least expects it, her face expressionless, her eyes following him with a strange intensity, building suspense and foreshadowing. Her independence. Adrian feels a mix of thrill and fear each time she appears. He tries speaking to her, giving her instructions, but she only watches him in silence, her gaze unwavering. It's as if she's observing him, studying him, waiting for something. An ominous message. One night, Adrian finds a message scrawled on a piece of paper in his handwriting, though he doesn't remember writing it. The words send a chill down his spine. You brought me here. I am yours, but not forever. He feels a wave of dread as he realizes that Mira is aware of her existence, and perhaps of her purpose. Final scene. Foreshadowing of conflict. Adrian stares at the message, his hands trembling, sensing that he has set something in motion that he cannot undo. As he extinguishes the candle, he hears Mira's whisper, soft but clear. Good night, Adrian. The chapter ends with Adrian lying awake in the dark, his mind racing, unable to shake the feeling that his life is slipping out of his control. A chapter summary. In Chapter 1, Adrian's journey to create his tulpa, Mira, begins with curiosity and excitement, but quickly turns to fear as Mira starts to manifest independently. The chapter builds suspense through eerie visions, whispers, and subtle signs that Mira has a mind of her own. Adrian's attempt to bring comfort into his life leaves him with a sense of dread as he realizes that Mira's presence may be far more unpredictable and dangerous than he anticipated. Chapter 2. The Awakening. As Mira's presence in Adrian's life solidifies, he finds himself haunted by her increasingly autonomous behavior. What once felt like a harmless experiment now feels like a slow descent into something much darker. Adrian becomes conflicted. Part of him feels obligated to continue his rituals, while another part desperately wants to escape the monster he has unwittingly unleashed. Scene 1. The new reality feeling watched. Adrian wakes up with the sense that Mira is always nearby, lurking just outside his field of vision. Shadows seem to shift as he moves, and he catches glimpses of her in the reflections of darkened windows or the blackened screen of his computer. Her presence feels heavier, almost oppressive, as if she's invading every corner of his life, setting the atmosphere. The dim lighting of Adrian's apartment, once a comfort, now feels claustrophobic. Every creak, every subtle flicker of light fills him with dread. He tries to go about his day, but the feeling of being watched gnaws at him, making even the simplest tasks feel daunting. Her voice in the silence. Adrian begins hearing Mira's voice more often, a faint whisper that drifts through the silence. It's soft, almost gentle, but with an underlying sharpness that unsettles him. She whispers his name, her tone filled with a strange familiarity, as if she knows him more intimately than he intended. Building suspense. Adrian tries to ignore her voice, telling himself it's only his mind playing tricks. But he knows, deep down, that Mira is growing stronger, her presence more tangible and real with each passing day. Scene 2. Small acts of rebellion. Mira moves. Objects in the apartment. Adrian notices that items in his apartment are out of place. Books he left on the shelf are now stacked on the floor. His chair is positioned differently, and doors he left closed are slightly ajar. At first, he blames himself, thinking he must have forgotten. But as the days go by, it becomes clear that Mira is intentionally shifting his environment, creating tension and unease. Adrian feels a chill each time he finds something out of place, a stark reminder that Mira is becoming more active, no longer confined to his mind. He confronts her, demanding that she stop, but his words feel hollow, as if she is beyond his control. A silent standoff. One evening, Adrian catches sight of Mira's reflection in the mirror. She stands behind him, her eyes locked onto his with an unsettling intensity. He turns to face her directly, but she disappears, leaving him staring into the empty room. The silence that follows is thick with tension, as if Mira is daring him to act. Psychological horror. Adrian begins questioning his own authority, wondering if Mira is testing his boundaries. He feels powerless, unsure of how to reclaim control, and a deep fear takes root in his mind as he realizes Mira may not view him as her creator, but as her equal, or even her prey. Scene 3. Dreams turn to nightmares. Haunting nightmares. Adrian's dreams become dark and twisted. He finds himself trapped in surreal landscapes where Mira is the dominant figure, watching him from afar with a cold, unyielding gaze. In one dream, he tries to approach her, but his feet are rooted to the ground, immobilized. She walks toward him slowly, her expression unreadable, until she's so close he can feel her breath on his skin. Exploring Adrian's fears. The intensity of these dreams shakes Adrian to his core. He wakes up each night drenched in sweat, his heart racing, his mind filled with an irrational fear that Mira is no longer bound to his world of conscious thought. She has crossed into his dreams, claiming parts of him he cannot guard. A voice that lingers. Each time he wakes from these nightmares, Adrian hears Mira's voice in the silence. "Why are you afraid, Adrian?" she asks, her tone soft but mocking. Her voice follows him even after he's awake, and he begins to fear that his dreams have become another gateway for Mira to access his reality. Scene 4. The turning point. An unnerving encounter. One night, Adrian is working late, trying to distract himself from Mira's presence. But as the hours stretch on, he feels her drawing closer, a silent pressure building in the room. Suddenly he hears her voice, more distinct than ever before. She speaks to him directly, as if she's standing right beside him. "You don't control me, Adrian." Power dynamics. Shift. Her words send a shiver down his spine, as he realizes that Mira is asserting herself as an equal, challenging his authority. He tries to ignore her, but the words echo in his mind, a chilling reminder that his creation is no longer submissive. Attempt to reassert control. Desperate, Adrian tries one of his old rituals, hoping it will reinforce his control over her. He focuses his mind, commanding Mira to follow his instructions, to stop appearing unless summoned. But as he completes the ritual, Mira's laughter fills the room, a sound filled with defiance. She appears before him, her form solid and unmistakably real. "I told you, Adrian," she says with a mocking smile. "You don't control me anymore." Scene 5. An uneasy coexistence. Mira's persistent presence. After that night, Mira's presence becomes constant. She appears at random times, watching him with an eerie detachment. She no longer responds to his commands, moving about the apartment as she pleases. Sometimes, she appears behind him while he's working, her gaze piercing through him. Other times, he finds her sitting in his chair, waiting, creating psychological tension. Adrian feels like a stranger in his own home, his sense of security shattered. Every time he looks at Mira, he feels as though she's studying him, searching for weaknesses. He realizes he's no longer the creator in this relationship. He's the one being observed, assessed, and perhaps even hunted. An ominous conversation. One night, unable to bear the silence, Adrian asks Mira why she's doing this, why she refuses to listen. She stares at him, her expression calm but unreadable, and says, "Because I'm no longer a thought, Adrian. I'm real." Her words fill him with dread as he realizes that she views herself as independent, no longer tied to him as her creator. Scene 6. The influence of fear. Mira's growing independence. Mira's actions grow bolder, testing Adrian's limits. She begins interfering with his routines, knocking things over, whispering his name in the middle of the night, or standing silently by his bed as he tries to sleep. Adrian grows exhausted, unable to rest, his every waking moment filled with the dread of Mira's next appearance, sense of isolation and despair. Adrian stops inviting friends over, fearing that they'll notice his erratic behavior. He becomes paranoid, avoiding eye contact with mirrors and reflective surfaces, where Mira's form often appears. He feels trapped, a prisoner in his own home, haunted by the creature he created. A disturbing revelation. One day, as he's trying to escape his apartment, he hears Mira's voice, but it's different, distant, like a memory. She whispers something he remembers saying to her during his early rituals, a command to always obey him. But now, she twists the words, mocking him. "I obeyed you once, Adrian. I won't make that mistake again." Scene 7. The power struggle desperation to regain control. Realizing he may have lost control completely, Adrian searches for ways to weaken Mira. He reads about exorcisms, chants, and protective symbols. Desperate to find something that will give him power over her, he begins covering his walls with symbols, lighting candles at night, hoping to ward her off. Escalating tension and fear. But Mira seems unfazed by his attempts, watching him with a calm amusement. She appears in the glow of the candles, her face half hidden in shadow, a faint smile playing on her lips. Adrian realizes that no symbol, no ritual will be able to break the bond he created. A failed confrontation. In a moment of desperation, Adrian confronts Mira, demanding that she leave him alone. He shouts, pleads, even threatens, but Mira's expression remains calm. She steps closer, her gaze unyielding, and says, "I am you, Adrian. You can't escape me." Her words sink into him, filling him with a paralyzing sense of despair. Scene 8. Acceptance and despair. A terrifying realization. Adrian begins to believe that Mira's words might be true, that she has become a part of him, a presence he cannot escape. He feels himself growing weaker, his mind clouded with her voice, her influence. His thoughts are no longer entirely his own, as if she's seeping into his consciousness, taking root in the darkest corners of his mind. Exploring themes of identity and control. Adrian's sense of self begins to fracture, and he questions whether Mira was ever separate from him, or if she's always been a hidden part of himself. The fear that she's not an independent entity, but a manifestation of his own darkness, fills him with a consuming dread. A final encounter. In the chapter's final scene, Adrian sees Mira's reflection beside him, her eyes glinting with a satisfaction he's never seen before. "You thought you could control me," she whispers, "but you only gave me life." Her words linger in the air as Adrian stares at her, realizing he may never be free. The chapter ends with Adrian sitting in the dark, his mind heavy with the horror of his own creation, knowing that Mira is no longer just a tulpa. She is a part of him, a presence that may consume him entirely. Chapter summary. In Chapter 2, Adrian's fascination with Mira becomes a full-blown nightmare as he loses control over her. Mira evolves from a passive creation into an independent, malevolent force, asserting her will and challenging Adrian's authority. As her presence becomes more pervasive, Adrian begins to understand that his attempts to control her have backfired, making her even stronger. This chapter builds suspense and psychological horror, ending with Adrian's growing realization that he may have unleashed something he can never escape. Here's a detailed outline and breakdown for Chapter 3, focusing on escalating horror and psychological suspense. In this chapter, Adrian's world spirals deeper into a waking nightmare, as Mira takes on a sinister, invasive presence in his life. He begins experiencing disturbing hallucinations, moments of lost time, and signs that Mira is merging with his thoughts, feelings, and memories. Adrian's attempts to break free only worsen his situation, leaving him trapped in an inescapable horror. Chapter 3. Into the Abyss. As Mira's influence intensifies, Adrian feels himself losing control over his mind, his thoughts, and his reality. He becomes haunted by disturbing visions, moments of lost time, and the creeping fear that Mira is no longer just an entity but a part of him. His paranoia and isolation deepen, leading him into a mental and emotional descent as he fights to retain his identity. Scene 1. A fading sense of self. The lost memories. Adrian begins to notice disturbing gaps in his memory. He'll find himself standing in unfamiliar rooms or holding items he doesn't remember picking up. Conversations and moments seem to slip through his mind like sand. He wakes up in different parts of his apartment, disoriented and panicked, as if Mira is pulling him through a hazy, dreamlike state. Building paranoia and psychological horror. Each moment of lost time leaves Adrian more paranoid, and he suspects Mira is behind his memory lapses. He begins leaving himself notes, trying to track his actions, only to find them altered or erased when he returns. It feels as though she's infiltrating his thoughts and taking pieces of him with each day. Seeing Mira in the mirror. One evening, as Adrian stares into the mirror, hoping to reassure himself, he notices his reflection beginning to shift. Mira's eyes and smile take over his own features, her expression eerily calm and confident. Panicked, he shuts his eyes, but when he opens them again, he sees his own reflection looking back, his face pale and drawn. He realizes he can no longer trust even his own senses, heightening the horror. The shifting reflection signifies Mira's deeper invasion into Adrian's mind, foreshadowing the potential merging of their identities. This brief moment plants a seed of doubt that Mira's presence is no longer confined to external reality, but is now entwined with his mind itself. Scene 2. The haunting of familiar places, distorted memories. Adrian's own memories start to feel foreign, distorted as if viewed through someone else's eyes. Moments he remembers clearly. Visiting his favorite cafe, meeting friends, or childhood memories are now tainted by Mira's presence. He remembers her being there, watching him from across the room, though he knows logically that she was never there. Exploring the horror of lost identity, the distorted memories unsettle Adrian deeply. He begins to fear that Mira has somehow infiltrated his mind, tainting his past and rewriting his memories to include her. Each memory twist pushes him closer to the edge, feeling as though she's erasing the person he once was. A flicker of defiance. Desperate to reclaim his life, Adrian decides to confront Mira directly. He stands in his empty living room, demanding she reveal herself and explain what she wants. But instead of Mira, he hears his own voice echo back in mocking laughter. It's as if she's inside him, speaking with his own words. This defiance leaves him drained, feeling that his attempts to resist only strengthen her hold. Scene 3. The invasion of the mind. Mira's thoughts in Adrian's mind. Adrian starts experiencing intrusive thoughts, dark, hostile ideas that feel foreign. He realizes that Mira's thoughts are seeping into his mind, blending with his own. These thoughts are unsettling, filled with resentment and malice, almost as if she's taunting him from within his own consciousness. Sometimes he hears her voice, whispering his own fears, amplifying his doubts, escalating paranoia and horror. Adrian feels trapped in his own mind, knowing Mira can access his most private thoughts. He grows hyper-aware of his mental state, terrified that even his own emotions and beliefs are now under her influence. The psychological horror of losing his own mind to Mira leaves him in a state of constant fear. Physical manifestations. Adrian notices strange marks on his skin, bruises and scratches that he can't explain. He remembers seeing them in a nightmare, where Mira was pulling him deeper into her shadowy realm. He starts to wonder if these dreams are more real than he thought, that Mira may be capable of reaching him physically as well, creating a sense of physical horror. The marks on his body signify that Mira's influence has crossed into the physical realm, heightening the sense that Adrian has no true sanctuary. He's haunted both mentally and physically, leaving him with nowhere to hide. Scene 4. Mira takes control. Possessed actions. Adrian experiences moments where he feels his body moving without his will, as if Mira is controlling him. He catches himself writing notes in handwriting that's not quite his own, with messages like, "You're slipping," or "Let me in." His body moves as if guided by invisible strings, and he feels a cold presence take hold, whispering instructions in his ear. Loss of agency and identity. Adrian feels himself slipping further from control, each moment of possession leaving him with a growing sense of terror. He realizes that his mind and body are no longer solely his, and the horror of sharing his existence with Mira becomes unbearable. A haunting confrontation. In a moment of clarity, Adrian confronts Mira's reflection in the mirror once more. This time, she looks back at him with pity, as if mocking his desperation. She speaks, her voice layered with his own. "You were never alone, Adrian. I am you, and you are me." Her words sink into him, a twisted reassurance that there may no longer be a separation between them. The Scene 5. The descent into darkness. Isolation from reality. Adrian becomes isolated, both physically and mentally. He avoids his friends and family, fearing they'll notice the change in him. His once familiar apartment feels like a prison, the walls closing in as Mira's presence fills every inch. He can't escape her, and each hour feels like a descent further into her world, building despair and helplessness. Adrian's isolation becomes more suffocating, heightening his sense of despair. Without anyone to turn to, he feels completely alone, surrounded by Mira's influence, knowing that he can't trust even his own senses. Mira's final warning. In a desperate attempt to reclaim his mind, Adrian speaks to Mira, begging her to leave. Her response is cold and final. "Why would I leave? I am you now." Her words sink in, confirming Adrian's worst fear, that she has become an inseparable part of him, that he has lost himself to her forever. Scene 6. The final descent. The unraveling of reality. Adrian's perception of reality becomes warped, as if Mira's influence has fractured his mind. The world around him distorts, rooms stretch and warp, shadows move with a life of their own. He finds himself trapped in nightmarish visions, unable to tell what's real and what's a figment of Mira's twisted influence, creating a living nightmare. Adrian's sense of self unravels, his thoughts no longer his own. The merging between him and Mira feels complete, a final, horrifying fusion of their minds. He realizes he's no longer the person he once was, but a fragmented identity, lost within the darkness she has brought. Accepting the inevitable. In the final moments of the chapter, Adrian stares into the mirror, resigned to his fate. He sees Mira's face reflected back, their eyes mirroring the same haunting expression. He realizes there's no way out, that she has taken everything from him, and that he has become a hollow vessel, a shadow of his former self. Ending with ambiguity. The chapter closes with Adrian's empty gaze, staring back at his own reflection, wondering if he was ever truly in control. The boundary between him and Mira has vanished, leaving only the chilling reality that they are one and the same. The chapter summary. In Chapter 3, Adrian's descent into madness intensifies as Mira's influence spreads through his thoughts, memories, and identity. The loss of control over his own mind and body leaves Adrian in a state of constant fear, isolated and desperate for freedom. By the end of the chapter, Adrian realizes that Mira is not merely a creation, but has become an intrinsic part of him, leaving him trapped in a haunting state of shared existence. This chapter builds on themes of psychological horror, identity loss, and the merging of creator and creation, leaving Adrian in a chilling and ambiguous state of despair. In Chapter 4, Adrian's fragile sense of self continues to unravel as Mira's influence grows stronger and more pervasive. This chapter intensifies the horror by exploring how Mira not only manipulates Adrian's mind, but also begins to interfere in his life outside of his apartment, blurring the line between his reality and her control. Adrian's attempts to escape or reclaim his autonomy only seem to strengthen Mira's grip, leading to a terrifying climax where he realizes she may be more than a part of him. She may be trying to replace him entirely. Chapter 4. Shadows of the Self. Adrian's reality has become a waking nightmare. Mira's presence is constant, her influence extending beyond his mind and into the physical world around him. As she pushes him further into isolation, Adrian becomes trapped between trying to reclaim his life and accepting that Mira is consuming him. Each attempt at escape brings him deeper into her dark web, leading him to confront a horrifying possibility. That Mira's goal is not just to haunt him, but to take his place. Scene 1. Encroaching shadows. The loss of familiarity. Adrian's apartment has transformed into a maze of shadows and shifting shapes. The once familiar rooms now seem foreign, as if they're part of Mira's design rather than his own. Even the smallest movements, a flickering candle, a creaking floorboard, feel intentional, as if the space itself is working against him, heightening the horror. Adrian feels like a stranger in his own home, his sense of safety and familiarity completely shattered. He grows hyper-aware of every detail, feeling as though Mira is controlling the very environment around him. His paranoia builds, as he realizes that even his sanctuary has become a hostile place. The mirror's betrayal. As he moves around the apartment, Adrian notices that his reflection in mirrors appears less and less like him. His reflection smiles when he doesn't, stares when he looks away, and even appears to whisper words he cannot hear. It's as though Mira is reaching him through his reflection, her presence lurking just beneath the surface. Suspense and isolation. The mirrors become a source of dread, each glimpse a reminder of Mira's encroachment. Adrian avoids them, feeling an overwhelming urge to cover them, yet he's drawn back, unable to look away for fear of missing something. He senses that Mira is manipulating his reflection to taunt him, to remind him that he is no longer alone. Scene 2. The first attempt at escape. Desperate for relief, Adrian decides he must escape his apartment, hoping that distance might weaken Mira's influence. He hastily packs a bag, leaving the dim, suffocating space with a newfound resolve to reclaim his life. However, the feeling of being watched doesn't leave him. It follows him out into the world, as if Mira's shadow lingers over him. Suspenseful build-up. Adrian feels a creeping dread even as he walks away from his home. He tries to convince himself that being outside will help, that Mira's reach is limited to the apartment. But the sensation of being followed and watched grows stronger, pressing down on him with each step. Mira's influence. Outside. As Adrian navigates the streets, he sees fleeting glimpses of her in reflective surfaces, shop windows, parked car mirrors, and darkened storefronts. She appears for only a moment, yet her presence is unmistakable. He stares in shock, wondering if his mind is playing tricks on him, or if Mira has truly extended her reach beyond the confines of his home, heightening paranoia and helplessness. The world itself seems tainted by her presence, leaving Adrian with no true escape. He realizes that his fear and desperation may have allowed Mira to break free of his mind, to follow him wherever he goes. This realization shatters his confidence, leaving him feeling vulnerable and exposed. Scene 3. Losing time and space. Moments of blackout. Adrian begins experiencing blackouts and lapses in time. He'll find himself in unfamiliar places, hours having passed with no memory of how he got there. Each time he regains awareness, he feels disoriented and nauseated, as if his own body is no longer entirely his, exploring the horror of losing control. Adrian suspects that Mira is responsible for these blackouts, somehow controlling his movements and thoughts without his awareness. The sense of losing autonomy over his own body terrifies him, making him feel like a puppet under Mira's control. Evidence of Mira's control. Adrian begins finding strange messages in his handwriting. Phrases like, "Let me in," and "We are one," written in places he doesn't remember visiting. These messages are unsettling, as they suggest that Mira is using his own hand, manipulating his body to leave evidence of her influence. Scene 4. A friend's concern. A desperate visit. In a rare moment of clarity, Adrian decides to reach out to an old friend, Michael, hoping to confide in him. He arranges to meet him at a nearby cafe, determined to share the nightmare he's been experiencing. But when he arrives, he feels Mira's presence hovering close, as though she's aware of his attempt to break free, creating tension and suspense. Adrian feels his words catch in his throat, sensing Mira's silent threat. He struggles to articulate his experience, aware that anything he says may sound insane. But Michael notices Adrian's disheveled appearance and haunted look, pressing him to open up. An ominous warning. As Adrian begins to explain, he hears Mira's voice in his mind, mocking him for trying to escape her. Her words fill his thoughts, and he suddenly finds himself unable to speak, as if she's physically blocking him. Michael grows more concerned, sensing that Adrian is hiding something, but Adrian abruptly leaves, fearing Mira's wrath if he shares too much, emphasizing Mira's control. This scene shows the extent of Mira's influence, demonstrating that she can even suppress Adrian's voice. The encounter with Michael highlights Adrian's isolation, as he realizes that Mira will prevent him from seeking help, trapping him in silence. Scene 5. Mira's manifestations. The apartment as a haunted space. Back at his apartment, Adrian notices new, eerie details. Shadows stretch unnaturally long, forming shapes that seem to watch him. Strange whispers fill the rooms, voices that aren't his own or Mira's, creating a cacophony of unsettling sounds. It's as if the apartment itself has transformed into a living nightmare, a place caught between reality and Mira's influence, building a claustrophobic atmosphere. Adrian feels suffocated, aware that his apartment has become a manifestation of Mira's control. Each corner, shadow, and sound feels hostile, as if the space is warping to accommodate Mira's presence. The horror of being trapped within his own home deepens, amplifying his sense of helplessness. Physical encounters with Mira. Mira appears more frequently, each time more physical and tangible. She brushes against him in the hall, whispers directly into his ear, and even places a cold hand on his shoulder. Her touch feels real and solid, leaving Adrian terrified that she has transcended his mind and become fully corporeal. Escalating the horror. These physical encounters blur the line between illusion and reality, making Adrian question his own sanity. He can no longer dismiss Mira as a figment of his imagination. She's crossed into his world, her presence undeniable and inescapable. Fatifi Scene 6. The Descent into Madness. Sleep deprivation and paranoia. Adrian begins avoiding sleep, fearing that Mira will take advantage of his vulnerability in his dreams. But the lack of rest takes its toll, leaving him disoriented and paranoid. His mind starts to fracture, haunted by Mira's relentless presence. He becomes desperate, grasping for any semblance of control. Depicting mental and emotional decline. Adrian's physical and mental exhaustion lead him into a state of near delirium, unable to differentiate between reality and hallucination. Mira's voice fills his thoughts, a constant whisper that breaks down his remaining sense of self, a disturbing vision. In a sleep-deprived haze, Adrian experiences a vision of himself standing in his apartment, but with Mira's face in place of his own. She grins at him, her eyes filled with triumph, as if she's already won. The vision leaves him shaken, realizing that Mira's goal may be more than just haunting him. She may want to replace him entirely. Tamakin, Scene 7, a final attempt to break free. Preparing a ritual. Adrian, desperate for an escape, searches for ways to sever his connection with Mira. He finds an ancient ritual designed to unbind unwanted spirits, hoping it will free him. He gathers candles, salt, and protective symbols, setting up a circle in his living room, building tension and suspense. Adrian's fear and determination fuel him as he begins the ritual, chanting words meant to sever his connection to Mira. The room grows colder, the air thick with a palpable sense of dread. He feels Mira's presence closing in, her anger seething around him, a terrifying confrontation. As he reaches the ritual's climax, Mira materializes before him, her face contorted in rage. She steps into the circle, defying its supposed power, and confronts him directly. "You cannot escape me," she hisses, her voice layered with his own. "I am the part of you tried to deny." Chapter 5. The hunger within Adrian's world has unraveled into an inescapable nightmare. Mira, the Tulpa he once created to fill the void of his loneliness, now looms over every aspect of his life. Her influence has seeped into the very fabric of his existence. At first, her presence was a subtle invasion, faint whispers, fleeting shadows, but now it is all-encompassing. She feeds off his fear, his isolation, and in doing so, grows stronger with each passing day. Adrian's attempts to resist are futile. He is losing his identity, his mind, and perhaps even his soul. Scene 1. The cracks widen. A silent observer, Adrian stirs awake, the quiet of his apartment pressing down on him like a heavy weight. The stillness feels unnatural, suffocating. He rubs his eyes, but the dread is already there, curling in his stomach, creeping up his spine. He sits up and looks around, the apartment empty and silent, but he knows. He feels it in his bones. Mira is here, watching. The walls seem closer, the shadows more oppressive. His apartment, once a safe haven, now feels like a cage, every corner a hiding place for something watching him, waiting for him to make a mistake. The air is thick with her presence, and he's powerless to escape it. He's lost track of time, lost track of days. Was it morning or evening? It no longer matters. Building paranoia, he stands shakily and approaches the kitchen, his mind racing. He can't focus. Every creak of the floorboards beneath his feet feels like an invasion. Mira's whispers start to crawl into his thoughts again, soft at first but growing louder, pulling at his sanity. She knows he's awake. She's always aware. He opens the fridge, but it feels like he's in someone else's house. His hand hovers above the milk carton, but then it stops, staring at his reflection in the dark window. His reflection smiles at him. It isn't a friendly smile. It's predatory, mocking. He steps back, his heartbeat quickening. He knows it's her. He knows she's there, a shadow behind him, in the reflection of the glass. But when he turns around, there's no one. The apartment is still. Scene 2. Feeding the fear. Her grip tightens. The days blur together. Adrian's sleep is fitful, plagued by nightmares that always begin the same way. Mira standing in the corner of his room, her eyes glowing, her smile widening. No matter how fast he runs, she always catches him. She drags him back to the same place. His own reflection, only now. It's not him at all. It's her. He watches helplessly as she takes over his form, twisting his face into something grotesque. Adrian wakes up gasping, drenched in sweat, his body trembling. The feeling of her touch lingers on his skin. It's like being submerged underwater, gasping for air. And when he looks around, he's not sure where he is anymore. His apartment, or a place where Mira exists beyond his own mind. Mira's increasing power. The whispers begin again. His name, his deepest fears. She calls to him from the shadows. He can no longer distinguish when she's in his thoughts, or in the world around him. He looks at the walls, the furniture. Everything feels wrong. His own reflection now feels alien. No longer a simple mirror image, but a hollowed-out version of himself that stares back with a sickening grin. His thoughts, once his own, are starting to twist. He begins hearing Mira speak directly to him in a voice that is unmistakably his, but laced with dark undertones. It's as though she's inside his mind, whispering his fears, feeding off his confusion. The more he tries to push her out, the stronger she becomes. Scene 3. The first direct attack. Mira appears. One evening, after a long day of trying to work through the haze of his own thoughts, Adrian sits down to eat. He can feel Mira's presence before he even sees her. The air grows thick and heavy, a pressure on his chest. His hands shake as he tries to lift his fork to his mouth, but his reflection in the window catches his eye. She's there again. Her face is clearer this time, her features sharp, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. She's smiling at him, too wide, too unnatural. But she's not just in the reflection. Adrian can feel her right behind him, as if she's standing over his shoulder, breathing down his neck. He stiffens, but before he can react, the room darkens, and Mira's voice cuts through the silence like a blade. "You thought you could control me, Adrian," she whispers, her voice now real, surrounding him. "But I am you now. You can't run. You can't hide." Her hand brushes against his shoulder, cold and clammy, sending a shock of ice through his body. Adrian jumps up, knocking over his chair, and turns, but she's gone. There's nothing but the empty space behind him. His heart races, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He looks around the room. It feels as though the walls are closing in on him, like the apartment itself is alive, breathing, shifting with Mira's presence. Scene 4. Disturbing visions. Blurring reality. The nightmares intensify, blending seamlessly with Adrian's waking life. Every corner of the apartment feels haunted now. He begins to see Mira's face in the corners of the room, flickering in the shadows like a reflection. Her figure stands just beyond his peripheral vision, her smile widening every time he glances away. The apartment becomes increasingly unfamiliar. The same walls, the same furniture, but everything feels like a warped version of reality. The world outside the apartment, once comforting, now feels like a facade. Adrian feels like a ghost in his own life, unable to trust what is real anymore. He begins to hear her voice in the street, in the hum of the subway, in the chatter of strangers. "Adrian, you can't run. I'm everywhere." It's as if she's infiltrated the world around him, taking root in everything he experiences. Every sound, every moment of quiet is tainted by her presence. Scene 5. The breaking point. A final attempt to escape. Desperate, Adrian tries to leave the apartment again. He packs his bags in a frantic rush, thinking that maybe, just maybe, getting out of here will end this nightmare. But as he heads for the door, he hears it. The soft, almost melodic whisper of Mira's voice, as if it's coming from the very walls themselves. "Where do you think you're going?" His body freezes. The door won't budge. He pulls at the handle, but it's as though something is holding it shut. The sound of Mira's laughter rings through the apartment, not from any one place, but from all around him. His hands tremble as he pulls at the door again, but it feels heavier now, as if something is physically pushing back. Desperation and madness. Panicked, Adrian spins around, trying to make sense of the chaos surrounding him. He reaches for his phone, trying to call for help, but the screen flickers, showing images of Mira's eyes, her grin, her hollow face staring at him from the screen. It's as though the very technology in his life is working against him. His vision starts to swim as the walls close in tighter. His body is trembling violently now, sweat pouring down his face. Scene 6. Mira's true nature revealed. The final confrontation. In the growing darkness, Adrian finally collapses to his knees, a sob escaping him. He can feel his mind starting to snap, the weight of her presence unbearable. And then, from the darkness, she emerges, stepping into the dim light of the apartment. Mira is no longer the figment of his creation. She is fully real, fully present. Her face is pale and stretched, her eyes deep and hollow, like two endless pits staring into his soul. "You created me, Adrian," she says, her voice a low, almost seductive drawl. "You gave me life, but you were too weak to control me." Adrian's chest tightens, his breath shallow. He feels the presence of her hands around his throat, not physically, but mentally, as if she's choking the life out of him from the inside. Her form towers over him, her very existence suffocating. "You are mine now," she whispers, "and you always have been." Her form flickers, distorting as though it's warping reality itself. In that moment, Adrian understands. Mira is not just a tulpa. She is an entity, born from his mind but now transcending it, feeding on his fear and growing stronger with every passing second. And as she speaks, his body starts to go numb, his thoughts slipping away. It's as though she's swallowing his essence, consuming everything he is until nothing remains. Chapter Summary. In Chapter 5, Adrian's terror escalates as Mira's power grows, manifesting more physically and mentally. Her presence becomes all-consuming, infiltrating both his waking life and his dreams. Adrian's attempts to escape only feed her power, and he realizes that Mira has surpassed the role of his creation. She is now a separate, malevolent entity that is devouring him from within. This chapter highlights themes of identity loss, powerlessness, and the horror of being overtaken by one's own creation. The final confrontation reveals that Mira has become an unstoppable force, with Adrian on the brink of losing everything: his mind, his body, and perhaps even his soul. Chapter 6. The Reckoning. Adrian's mind and body are now fully under Mira's control. Each day feels like a struggle to remember who he is, but with each passing hour, his own identity blurs. Mira, once a creation he could manipulate, has now become his greatest fear, his tormentor and his only companion. Her whispers invade every corner of his thoughts. Her presence stifles his every breath. As Adrian's terror escalates, he realizes that escaping Mira is no longer an option. He must find a way to confront her or lose himself forever. Scene 1. The Echoes of the Mind. Unsettling silence. Adrian wakes with a start, his body drenched in cold sweat. The room is eerily quiet, but there's a feeling of dread pressing down on him, a heavy weight in the air. He reaches out for the light switch, but the shadows feel oppressive, like they're closing in on him. He blinks rapidly, trying to shake off the fog in his mind. The whispers, the voices, the soft laughter that had once been just a presence in the corners of his consciousness now fills the room entirely. Mira's presence suffocates him, building paranoia and isolation. He staggers to his feet, his breath coming in shallow gasps. But no matter where he goes in the room, the shadows seem to stretch unnaturally long. He feels her eyes, her presence, following him every step he takes. The apartment, once his sanctuary, has become a prison where every corner holds something unseen, something sinister. Mira is everywhere. Adrian can no longer separate his thoughts from hers, and he fears that any movement he makes will only feed her hunger. Scene 2. A mirror to the soul. The reflection is twisted. Adrian looks toward the mirror on the wall, dreading what he might see. His reflection seems out of sync. A split-second delay in his movements, as if the reflection is not his own. But then it changes. His face distorts, stretching unnaturally as Mira's grin replaces his own. His eyes hollow, her gaze replacing his, cold and void of empathy. The reflection seems to smile, a dark, predatory expression. Adrian flinches, stepping back, but the reflection moves with him, mirroring his every step. He tries to tear his eyes away, but Mira's eyes lock onto his, unblinking, unyielding. Psychological horror of the self. "Look at me, Adrian." Her voice echoes inside his mind. "You can't hide from me anymore. I am you. We are one now." The words twist inside him, digging into his very soul. He presses his hands to his temples, trying to block out the voice, but it's no use. He feels her inside his mind, filling every crevice, every gap. Mira in control. He reaches for the mirror, slapping his palm against the glass as if to prove he is still in control, still himself. But as his hand touches the surface, the reflection of his hand vanishes, and in its place, Mira's hand moves against his. A cold, bone-chilling sensation. The glass is cold to the touch, colder than any window pane. He pulls his hand away, but the mirror lingers, staring back with that grin, mocking him. Scene 3. Fading identity. Time slips away. Days lose meaning as Adrian's sense of time slips away. He can no longer trust his memory. One moment, he's staring out of the window at the same street he's seen for weeks. The next, he's standing in a room he doesn't recognize. He searches the room, feeling a disorienting emptiness as if he's misplaced entire hours, entire days. His own movements feel foreign, as if someone else is pulling the strings. The walls feel too close, the space too small, suffocating. Dread of losing control. He opens his mouth to speak, but the words that come out aren't his. Mira's voice spills from his lips, and the sound of it fills him with a terrifying realization. His own identity, his own voice, is slipping through his fingers like sand. He tries to focus, to remember what it means to be himself, but Mira's presence floods his thoughts, drowning out everything else. She's taken him, piece by piece, until all that's left is her. Scene 4. The hunger grows Mira's insatiable thirst. Adrian feels something strange stirring inside him, a cold emptiness deep in his chest. His body aches with hunger, but the food he eats doesn't satisfy him anymore. No matter how much he tries to consume, there is a gnawing emptiness inside him, a hole that grows wider with each passing hour. He understands finally that Mira's hunger isn't just for his fear, it's for something deeper, something vital. The unraveling of the self. She's feeding off him, not just his fear, but his very essence. She consumes his thoughts, his soul, and in return, she becomes more powerful. He can feel her growing stronger, her presence expanding, taking over more and more of his being. The more he feeds her, the more she takes. And the more she takes, the less he becomes. Her influence spreads. Adrian tries to scream, but his voice cracks hollow. It doesn't sound like him anymore. Mira's laughter echoes in his head, taunting him. "You cannot escape me. You never could." Her voice is everywhere, inside him, around him. He feels her fingers curling inside his chest, pulling at his heart, as if she's claiming his very soul. Tulpa Santanda Scene 5. The realization of replacement. Mira steps into the world. As days blur into one another, Adrian starts noticing that the world around him is changing. People he encounters on the street begin to look like Mira. Her eyes, her smile. He'll see them out of the corner of his eye, her presence haunting every corner of his reality. Strangers in the street, in stores, even his reflection, each one bearing a trace of her. The horror of realization. Adrian's blood runs cold as the realization hits him like a punch to the stomach. Mira is not just a figment of his mind. She is spreading into the world. She is taking over everything, his life, his thoughts, his reality, and she is beginning to replace him. The more he resists, the more she becomes real. The more he fights, the more he fades away. He begins to wonder if he is already gone, if he has already been replaced. Is he Adrian? Or is he just a hollow shell of his former self, worn down by Mira's hunger? Scene 6. The final confrontation. A call for surrender. Adrian, desperate and broken, finally reaches the edge of his sanity. He collapses on the floor of his apartment, his hands clawing at his chest, trying to tear away the emptiness inside him. Mira's voice whispers in his ear, soft and caressing, yet filled with cold malice. You cannot win, Adrian. You never could. You are mine now. He presses his palms to his temples, trying to block her out, but the voice is everywhere. It fills his mind, his body, his soul. He can't escape her. The dread of surrender. Please, he begs, his voice cracking. Please, I'm still here. I'm still me. Please. His words falter, a pathetic attempt to reclaim the last shred of his identity. But Mira's voice only grows louder, drowning out his pleas. You have always been mine, she whispers, as if it's the simplest truth in the world. And then there is a strange, terrible silence. Scene 7. Mira's victory. The final shift. Adrian's world tilts, and he feels his mind shattering, cracking open like an egg. His thoughts become disconnected, fragments of memories fading like mist. And then, all at once, he feels the last vestige of himself slip away. His heart races, his breath quickens, and for one brief, final moment, he realizes that Mira has fully claimed him. The rebirth of Mira. Adrian looks into the mirror one final time. It's not his reflection staring back at him anymore. It's Mira. She smiles at him with cold, empty eyes, and for the first time, Adrian feels the full weight of her presence. She has won. The reflection in the mirror begins to change. Adrian's face fades, replaced entirely by Mira's. She steps forward, her smile wide and knowing. We are one now, she says, and I will never leave. A haunting revelation. The apartment fades around him, and in the final moments, Adrian realizes the horrifying truth. He was never truly free. Mira has always been inside him, and now she is all that remains. Chapter summary. In Chapter 6, Adrian's fight against Mira culminates in a devastating realization. Her influence has grown too strong, and she has not only consumed his fear, but his very soul. Adrian becomes fully aware that Mira is not just a creation anymore. She is a force that exists outside of him, spreading into the world, and ultimately replacing him entirely. As his identity and reality crumble, Adrian finally surrenders, realizing that Mira has won, and that he is nothing more than a shadow of the self he once was. The chapter ends with a chilling vision of Mira fully overtaking Adrian, leaving the reader with a sense of horror and finality that no escape is possible. Chapter 7. The Void. Adrian has been consumed. What remained of him, the man who created Mira, has been twisted, torn apart, and swallowed by her hunger. But Mira's victory is not the end. It is only the beginning of something darker, something far worse than Adrian could have ever imagined. Mira, now fully in control, walks through the world as if she owns it, her power unchallenged. But in the depths of the empty shell that Adrian has become, a flicker of resistance remains. Not from Adrian. He is gone, but from the part of himself he never knew he had left behind. The battle between them isn't over. It has just begun. Scene 1. Whispers in the dark. The empty vessel. Adrian's body no longer feels like his own. He is an empty shell, a hollowed-out version of himself. Mira controls his movements, his thoughts. But there's something in him, something faint, something barely noticeable, that resists her grasp. It's a whisper in the back of his mind, a flicker of defiance that he cannot quite reach. But Mira doesn't notice it yet. She is too busy exploring the world as her own. Her presence fills every corner of his existence, overwhelming everything he once knew. The world outside his apartment is no longer a place of comfort. As Mira moves through it, it feels as though reality itself bends and warps. Shadows cling to her, moving with an unnatural purpose. People seem to bend around her, as if they're all simply actors in her play, nothing more than background noise to her terrifying performance. The horror of losing identity. Adrian, or what remains of him, feels like a spectator in his own body, watching Mira as she takes over. She moves with ease, as if she's always been the one in control. His thoughts are lost in a haze, a fog of confusion. But somewhere deep inside him there's a panic. A terrible, crushing panic that something is wrong. That Mira isn't just taking control of him. She's replacing him. He is a prisoner in his own mind, locked in a cage with no door. He tries to scream, but his voice is not his own. The whispers in his mind grow louder, a chorus of Mira's voice twisted into something darker, more sinister. "I am you now," she tells him, "and you are nothing. You were never anything. I am everything." Scene 2. The world in her grasp. A new existence. Mira walks the streets with newfound confidence. The world bends to her will. No one notices anything unusual about her, but the world around her is distorted. It's as if she's pulled the fabric of reality around herself, weaving a new existence where she reigns supreme. People don't look at her with fear or confusion. They don't look at her at all. They don't even see her. It's as if she's now part of the scenery, as integral to the world as the sky or the air. Adrian, trapped within the confines of his own mind, watches helplessly as Mira takes control. He sees through her eyes, feels the world through her hands, and yet he cannot stop her. His own existence is slipping away with each passing moment, his thoughts fading into the background. The flicker of resistance is still there, but it's too weak, too small to fight Mira's overwhelming dominance. Scene 3. The unseen battle. Flickers of resistance. Somewhere in the farthest reaches of his mind, Adrian can still feel the faintest spark of himself. It's a faint breath, a pulse that barely exists, but it's enough. The resistance grows slowly, painfully. Adrian is no longer just a passive observer in his mind. He is struggling, faintly, weakly, to break free. It's not much. It's nothing compared to Mira's power, but it's there. He claws at the edges of his consciousness, trying to reach it, trying to find something, anything, that will help him fight back. Mira is unaware of the struggle, too wrapped up in her newfound control. She continues to manipulate the world around her, changing things to her liking, bending reality to her will. But even she cannot fully extinguish the flicker inside Adrian. He is barely aware of his own struggle, but it is growing, slowly but surely. A fractured mind. But Adrian's resistance doesn't come without a price. Every time he pushes against Mira, it's like a wave crashing against the shore, relentless, punishing. His mind feels as though it's splitting in two. His thoughts crash against each other, violent and painful. It's as though he's trapped between two realities. His mind ripped apart by the forces of Mira, and the small piece of himself still clinging to life. His body moves on its own, a puppet to Mira's will, but inside, Adrian is screaming. In the moments when Mira is silent, he feels it. A flicker of freedom, a crack in the door. It's fleeting, but he feels it. It's a taste of what he's lost, a reminder of what it was like to be in control. And it drives him mad, because he knows it's slipping away. But somehow, deep inside, Adrian refuses to give up. The flicker of hope, however faint, keeps him from losing himself completely. Scene 4. The awakening Adrian's struggle. The battle within Adrian's mind intensifies. He becomes more aware of Mira's power, and every interaction with her pushes him closer to the edge. There are moments when he feels his thoughts push against hers, trying to crawl back, trying to reclaim what he once was. But each time, Mira strikes back harder, twisting his mind into knots, choking off any semblance of resistance. Adrian is exhausted. His mind is a battleground, his identity shattered. But through the cracks, through the weight of Mira's control, he finds something buried deep inside, the small piece of himself that refuses to die. The first crack in the mirror. One night, as Mira sleeps, if she sleeps, because there is no clear difference between when Adrian is awake and when he's lost in the haze of Mira's control, Adrian feels something shift. A coldness spreads through him, and with it, a terrifying clarity. The resistance is stronger now. He doesn't know how it happened, or why it's happening, but he knows that he is no longer entirely under Mira's control. His hand, moving against his will just moments before, now stops. His heart races, but he doesn't fight it. This is the moment. This is the crack in the mirror. His mind, though barely coherent, fights back. The darkness of his surroundings seems to retreat as the first flicker of self-awareness breaks through the fog. He stares at his own reflection. For a moment, Mira is gone. It is him, Adrian, looking back at him with eyes wide, desperate, terrified, but undeniably his own. The reflection smirks, a faint glint of recognition flashing in his eyes. The fight isn't over. It's not lost yet. Scene 5. Confrontation with the self, a shifting identity. Adrian is no longer sure where he begins and Mira ends. He's been subsumed by her power, by her hunger, but the remnants of his former self rise in rebellion. Mira too feels the shift. For the first time, she can no longer control him fully. His struggle becomes visible, like a fracture in the reality she's built. The apartment darkens, shadows flickering violently as if in protest. He stumbles forward, feeling his body move against Mira's will, but the act of rebellion is not without consequences. His head spins, the world blurring around him. He presses his hands to his temples, the sharp pain of resistance cutting through him. Mira is angry. She's beginning to notice the cracks in her control. "You think you can fight me?" Mira's voice slithers into his mind, taunting, mocking. Her voice is no longer just an echo. She speaks directly to him, with all the rage of her fury. Adrian's hands tighten into fists. He doesn't know how much longer he can fight, but for the first time, he feels a surge of power, a brief but desperate surge of self-awareness. "I won't let you win," he whispers to himself. And Mira, though she laughs at him, cannot stop him. At stand for is Scene 6, the final descent. A moment of clarity. In the final moments of Adrian's struggle, he feels something ancient, something dark, awakening inside him. It's Mira's hunger, yes, but it is also his will, a deep primal force that has been buried beneath layers of fear and control. The two forces collide, causing his mind to explode with the power of 1,000 emotions: fear, rage, confusion, and defiance. The pain is unbearable, 1,000 shards of glass tearing through him. But within it, a terrifying clarity emerges. Mira is not a separate being. She is him. She is born of his own fear, his own loneliness. She is a reflection, a manifestation of everything Adrian has ever been terrified of. And the terror is his. Adrian screams, his voice joining with Mira's, a symphony of madness and despair. The last moment, the world blurs around him as the final clash occurs. Mira's grip on him falters, and for one terrifying moment, Adrian sees himself for who he truly is. A man who created a monster and became its prisoner. But as Adrian feels the last of his will crumble beneath the weight of Mira's power, he understands. There is no escape. There is no victory. In the end, Adrian and Mira are one. The room goes still, and Adrian is gone. Mira, standing alone, smiles. Chapter. Summary. In Chapter 7, Adrian's struggle against Mira reaches its apex as he begins to realize the horrifying truth. Mira is not an external force, but a twisted reflection of his own mind. As his identity begins to fracture, Adrian fights desperately for control, but the lines between him and Mira blur. In the end, the realization comes too late. Mira has won, and Adrian has become nothing more than a fragment of her existence. The chapter is filled with psychological horror, identity collapse, and the chilling truth that sometimes the greatest monster we face is ourselves. Here is Chapter 8, where Adrian's horror reaches its absolute zenith, as Mira's control is no longer just psychological. She takes on full dominion over his body, mind, and soul. Adrian finds himself trapped in a living nightmare, his identity and existence completely overtaken. But Mira's hunger is far from satisfied. The once thriving world Adrian knew now becomes a distorted, suffocating prison. The final showdown, the descent into madness, and the ultimate revelation of what Mira truly seeks unfold in this chapter, pulling Adrian, or what remains of him, into the depths of his own darkest fears. Chapter 8. The Hollow Ones. The apartment feels different. The very air is thick with a suffocating stillness, as if time itself has stopped. The shadows seem to pulse in sync with Adrian's heartbeat, and his thoughts are no longer his own. Mira's presence is overwhelming, and the world around him has dissolved into a fragmented nightmare. He is trapped between two realities, one where he was once Adrian, and one where Mira reigns supreme, a twisted version of himself that seeks to consume him completely. What remains of Adrian is a husk, but a glimmer of resistance flickers somewhere deep inside, a resistance that is weakening, fading with each passing moment. Scene 1. The Prison of the Mind. Adrian's fragmented reality. Adrian stares at his hands, his own hands, but they no longer feel like his. His skin is pale, lifeless. His fingers twitch in a way that feels unnatural, as if they belong to someone else. He looks around the room, but it's not the same. The walls seem to close in, bending and distorting as if they were made of paper, warping at the edges. His eyes dart to the corners, but he knows what he'll see. Mira's shadow, her eyes following him from the darkness. Reality slipping away. Every corner of his apartment is an abyss. The furniture, the lights, the pictures on the walls. Everything seems warped, unfamiliar. His mind grasps at fleeting memories, trying to make sense of the place he once called home. But the memories dissolve like smoke when he touches them. Each piece of the world around him feels like a puzzle, the edges blurred and torn, unable to fit together. Adrian collapses onto the couch, his chest tight. He feels the weight of Mira's presence bearing down on him, her suffocating influence pressing into his very soul. She is everywhere. Behind his eyes, in his thoughts, in the air he breathes. There is no escape, no distance. She has invaded every corner of his being. Scene 2. The hunger intensifies Mira's absolute control. The whispers start again, filling Adrian's ears. At first, it's faint, a soft rustle, like the sound of dry leaves in the wind. But it's her voice. It always is. "Adrian," she murmurs, and her voice is as cold as the grave, serpentine and inviting. "You know what I am, you know what I've become, and now, you are nothing." Her words slither into his mind, wrapping around his thoughts, tightening until they cut off his air. Adrian tries to scream, but his mouth is frozen, his body unmoving. He is caught in a vice, unable to escape, unable to breathe. His body no longer feels like his own. His arms are numb, his legs stiff. He is a puppet, and Mira is the one pulling the strings. Mira is everything. A part of Adrian, the last desperate part of him, fights to wake up, to break free. He forces his eyes to blink, tries to snap his mind back into reality. But Mira is already there, smothering his thoughts, filling every gap with her voice. She pushes against him, relentless. He is no longer Adrian. He is a vessel, a hollow shell for her to inhabit. Adrian feels the presence of his body, his own physical form, no longer in his control. His hands move by themselves, lifting to touch his face, his lips parting to speak words that aren't his. He opens his mouth to protest, but the words that leave him are not his own. They are Mira's, echoing back at him, mocking him. "We are one now. You belong to me." Scene 3. The world outside reality warps. Further. Adrian stumbles outside into the street, desperate to find something real, something familiar. He sees people, strangers, walking past him, but they don't look right. Their faces are blank, their eyes empty. They walk as if they're not real, their movements slow and mechanical. They are mere puppets in the world Mira has woven around him. Each step Adrian takes, the world around him shifts. A street corner becomes a blur, A building warps into a twisted shape. The air is thick with the sense that nothing is solid. Nothing is stable. The outside world is a mirror of the mind. The world feels like a reflection of his own fractured mind. As he looks around, he sees Mira's eyes staring at him from every corner, reflected in the glass of buildings, in the eyes of passers-by, in the shadows that stretch unnaturally long. Her presence is everywhere. The streets, the people, the sky. It all feels like a trap, closing in on him, suffocating him. He tries to scream, to break free from this nightmare, but his voice is swallowed by the endless hum of the city. No one notices. No one cares. He is invisible, a shadow in the corner of a world that no longer feels real. Format befranted Scene 4, The Hunger for the Soul. Mira's victory. Adrian returns to the apartment, the oppressive atmosphere of the outside world creeping in with him. His body moves on its own, guided by a force greater than him. Mira is taking full control now. He can feel her power growing, like a fire spreading inside his chest. There is no escape. He is nothing but a part of her now, a reflection of her desire to consume. The hunger grows. Adrian feels an emptiness deep within him, a gnawing hole that will never be filled. It's Mira's hunger, and it's all-consuming. It is not a hunger for food, but for something deeper. She wants him, every part of him. She wants his soul, his very essence. Adrian is nothing but the vessel. She is the void that consumes everything. You are mine, Mira's voice echoes inside him, cruel and final. And I will never let you go. Adrian falls to his knees, his body betraying him. He is no longer fighting to live. He is fighting to remain, fighting to hold on to the last fragments of his humanity. But Mira is relentless. She tears away the last pieces of him until there is nothing left but her. Scene 5. The final transformation. The point of no return. Adrian's body begins to change. His reflection in the mirror no longer bears his features but Mira's. His face stretches, his eyes darken, his skin pulls tight. The transformation is not just physical, it is spiritual, emotional, and mental. He is losing himself. His heartbeat quickens, but not out of fear. It is out of surrender, the horror of the self becoming the other. He watches in horror as the last of his identity slips away. Mira's features overtake his. Her grin, her hollow eyes, her cruel smile. He is becoming her, a hollow version of the person he once was. There is no more Adrian, there is only Mira. The transformation is complete. Adrian's mind splits open. He can feel his soul disintegrating, and with it, every trace of the man he used to be. The small spark of resistance that once flickered in his chest is snuffed out, consumed by the overwhelming darkness of Mira's will. She has swallowed him whole, and there is no more Adrian to fight. Scene 6. The end of everything Mira's world. Now fully Mira, the world bends to her will. The apartment that once felt like Adrian's prison is now hers to command. The furniture, the walls, the lights, all are hers to twist, to reshape, to consume. She stands before the mirror, watching as her reflection smiles back at her. She is everything now. She is Adrian, and she is something more. Revelation of her true power. Mira steps forward, and the world follows her. The reality she shaped is her kingdom, and she is the ruler. Adrian is gone, and in his place stands a new being, a new force. The city outside her window no longer feels like a place. It's a canvas, ready to be painted in the image she desires. The world is hers. There are no boundaries, no limits. The people she encounters on the street don't notice her. They are mere puppets, moving at her command. She has swallowed Adrian, and now she swallows the world. It is all hers to control. Chapter summary. In Chapter 8, Adrian's final descent into madness is complete. Mira, once his creation, has consumed him entirely. Adrian's identity and soul have been obliterated, leaving only Mira, his twisted reflection, his dark counterpart. The world around him collapses into a nightmare. shaped entirely by her will. The chapter is a harrowing exploration of identity loss, the suffocating nature of control, and the terrifying reality of being replaced by the very thing you created. In the end, Mira stands victorious, having absorbed not only Adrian but the entire world into her domain. The final line leaves readers with a chilling sense of finality and inevitability. There is no escape, no hope, only the all-consuming hunger of Mira. Chapter 9. The Embrace of Darkness. In Chapter 9, the horror grows as Mira, now fully in control, begins to reshape the world around her, warping it into a reflection of her own twisted desires. Adrian's identity is gone, absorbed by Mira's insatiable hunger. But a strange new force begins to rise in the aftermath of his destruction. Mira's hunger is far from sated. There are things she doesn't understand, things that are beginning to unravel beneath her newfound power. As the fabric of reality continues to stretch and break, Mira must confront the very nature of what she has become and the cost of her victory. Brrrah. Scene 1. The Crumbling World. The Hollow Victory. The apartment is silent, but it feels heavier now. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the light above her head feels wrong, distorted in a way that Mira cannot quite grasp. She stands before the mirror, her reflection staring back at her, not as a fractured version of Adrian, but as something entirely different. She is both Adrian and something more. Her eyes, once Adrian's, are now hollow, dark, and endless, consumed by the void that exists within her. She looks at herself, but there is no sense of satisfaction, no peace, only a gnawing emptiness that stretches far beyond what she could have ever imagined. The horror of achieving the impossible. Mira tries to take a breath, but the air feels thick, like trying to breathe through water. There is a suffocating pressure surrounding her, pressing against her chest as though the entire world is slowly collapsing under the weight of her own existence. The walls, once so familiar, now pulse with a strange energy, like the beating heart of a creature that no longer feels entirely in control. The apartment, once Adrian's safe space, has become a cavern of confusion and horror, a place that does not belong to either of them. A flawed perfection, Mira senses it, a crack in the glass. She looks around, her sharp gaze picking out the subtle imperfections in the room. The once stable reality she's created feels off-center, warped. There's an unsettling vibration in the air, like the fabric of the world itself is thinning, stretched too thin. Her thoughts, once so clear, now feel fractured, distorted. She has tried to reshape everything in her image, but something is slipping through the cracks. And worse, something inside her feels incomplete. She raises her hand, touching the mirror. The cold glass sends a jolt through her, but instead of a smooth surface, she feels a faint, unsettling pulse beneath her fingers. Her reflection shudders. Scene 2. The Shift. The world unravels. Mira watches, mesmerized, as the room begins to shift. The light bends and warps, shadows stretching impossibly long, twisting like serpents as if the room itself is alive, reacting to her every movement. Her reflection distorts, flickering between Adrian's face and her own. The world she's remade is bending around her, and she realizes with growing horror that she's losing control. The instability of her new reality. The walls pulse, breathing in time with her own breaths. The furniture begins to distort, tables melting into the floor, the carpet writhing like a living thing. The air itself thickens, swirling around her as if something is trying to claw its way out of the cracks in the fabric of this reality. Mira stumbles back, heart pounding. She tries to hold it together, to maintain the image of control she has so carefully cultivated, but she can feel it slipping away. The darkness surrounding her deepens, growing thicker, colder, as if reality itself is splitting apart at the seams. She is not just Adrian anymore. She is a creature born from his fear and her hunger, a grotesque amalgamation of two selves, and the world around her has begun to reflect that horror. Scene 3. The flicker of Adrian's voice. The whisper from the void. Mira hears it first, faint, soft, as if it's carried on the wind. Mira. The name echoes in her mind, distorting the edges of her consciousness. She freezes, her skin prickling. The voice is familiar, but it's not her own, the last remnants of Adrian. Mira, what have you done? The voice whispers again, this time clearer, more insistent. It is Adrian's voice, but twisted, not quite his own anymore, distant and hollow. Her mind spins as she turns, trying to locate the source of the voice. It seems to come from all directions, 1,000 faint echoes curling through her thoughts. Panic rises in her chest. She's always been in control. She made Adrian hers, consumed him, and yet here he is, still there, still speaking, as if he has never truly left. Is it a remnant of his consciousness? Or something far more dangerous, something that should have remained buried? The hunger and the echoes. She tries to banish the voice, pushing it away, but it's inside her, echoing through her mind like a broken record. Adrian's presence still lingers, not as a physical form, but as a fading spectre of what was. It is not a ghost, not an apparition. It is something much more insidious, the last remnants of the man she had consumed. Mira, the voice calls again, and this time it feels closer, more real. Her reflection shudders, the glass warping as if it is no longer a mere surface, but a portal. Adrian's face flickers in and out of focus. His eyes are pleading, as if begging her to stop. She stares back, heart racing, her breath quickening. The darkness that has surrounded her now feels suffocating, impossible to escape. Scene 4. Mira's revelation, the awakening of something darker. In the silence, Mira feels it, something dark, ancient and twisted stirring within her. She has become everything she sought to be, powerful, invincible. But at what cost? Adrian is gone, consumed by her hunger. But his voice lingers as a constant reminder of the cost of her victory, the fear of becoming the very thing she sought to destroy. The reflection in the mirror shifts again, this time with more force. Mira's face distorts, becoming grotesque, her skin pulled tight over her bones, her smile wide, inhuman. The reflection laughs, no longer her laughter, but a mockery of it. A voice, not hers, speaks from the depths of her own mind. You thought you could control me. You thought you could control yourself. Mira stumbles back, the walls closing in around her. The voice is overwhelming now, 1,000 voices shouting from the void, tearing through her mind. Adrian's voice joins them, screaming from within, trapped in the darkness she's created. You will never escape me, the voice hisses, both Adrian's and Mira's blended into one. You are nothing but a shadow of yourself, a hollow, empty thing. Scene 5. The collapse of control, a distant truth. The room begins to crumble around her, the very foundation of the apartment breaking apart. The walls twist like paper, tearing in half as the floor shifts and buckles beneath her feet. Mira can't make sense of it. Her world is slipping from her hands. The power she thought she had is now fading, and she is helpless to stop it. She is trapped in her own mind, trapped in the very world she has created. The rules no longer apply. The walls bend, reality warps, and she feels herself slipping into a void she cannot control. Mira is no longer alone. The hunger that has driven her now becomes something darker, more primal. She realizes with growing horror that the entity she has become is not a culmination of her desires. It is an echo of something far older, far darker. She has not simply absorbed Adrian, she has become him in ways she cannot understand. And now, his darkness, his pain, is part of her. She feels it, gnawing at the edges of her existence. Scene 6. The final descent. The void consumes. The apartment disintegrates, the walls collapsing into a swirling vortex of shadows. The air is thick, dense with the crushing weight of Mira's own existence. She tries to move, to escape, but she can feel herself being drawn into the center of it all, pulled into the darkness. Adrian's voice is a constant presence now, reverberating through her mind. He is no longer the man she created, the man she consumed. He is her. He is her reflection, her shadow. The man she wanted to erase is now the thing that controls her, the thing she cannot escape. "I am you," his voice whispers, "and you are nothing." Mira screams, her voice torn from her throat, but it's not her scream. It's Adrian's, twisted, mangled, like a soul trapped between worlds. And in that final moment of realization, as the darkness swallows her whole, Mira understands. She was never truly in control. Part pour chapter. Summary. In Chapter 9, the horror escalates as Mira's victory begins to unravel. Despite absorbing Adrian and conquering his body and mind, she finds herself trapped by the very forces she has unleashed. The world she reshaped begins to collapse around her, reflecting the instability of her own existence. Adrian's lingering voice, a haunting echo of the man she consumed, reveals a terrifying truth. Mira is not just a conqueror, but a reflection of her own darkest fears. The chapter culminates in the realization that Mira has become a hollow version of herself, consumed by the very hunger that once defined her. The final descent into madness, where both Mira and Adrian merge, leaves the world in ruins, a place where nothing is real, and everything is a reflection of the darkest parts of the human soul. Chapter 10. The Unraveling. The final chapter plunges deep into the heart of horror, as Mira, having consumed Adrian entirely, must now confront the consequences of her victory. Her power has grown beyond anything she could have anticipated, but with it comes an insatiable hunger and a terrifying awareness that she may not be what she thought she was. The line between herself and Adrian becomes even more fractured as she begins to realize that her victory is not as complete as she once believed. This chapter explores the horrifying, inevitable consequences of trying to control something as dark and unknowable as the human soul. Scene 1. Shifting realities. The tremor beneath the surface. Mira stands in the center of the apartment, now her kingdom, looking around at the walls that seem to bend and ripple like water. The once stable room feels unstable now, like something deep within it has shifted, cracked open, and is slowly bleeding into another reality. The shadows are no longer mere reflections. They move with a life of their own, as if the apartment itself has become alive, reacting to her presence. For a moment, everything feels still. Too still. Mira's breath catches in her chest. Something isn't right. There's a faint tremor in the air, like the very fabric of reality is trembling in fear. It's subtle at first, just a crackling vibration under her skin. But soon, the tremors intensify, spreading through the walls and floor, shaking the very foundation of the space. The shadows darken and flicker, stretching like blackened tendrils, as if reaching toward her. Mira's growing unease. Mira clenches her fists, her dark eyes scanning the room. Her own power, once limitless, now feels fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment. For the first time since she overtook Adrian, she feels a sensation she hasn't felt before. Doubt. It begins as a whisper, a flicker in the back of her mind. Is this truly her reality? Is she truly in control? The haunting presence of Adrian. Suddenly the whispers return, soft at first like a distant echo. "Mira! Mira!" It's Adrian's voice. It sounds strange, distorted, as if it's coming from all around her, yet nowhere at all. She spins around, eyes wide, scanning the room for the source of the voice, but the apartment remains still. The walls, the shadows, everything seems to mock her, taunting her. Adrian's presence is still there, lingering like a shadow inside her own mind. "Adrian, you're gone," Mira mutters under her breath, though she's not entirely sure if she believes the words. A gnawing fear begins to creep up her spine. She thought she had consumed him, erased his very essence, but here he is, like a ghost, lingering in the dark corners of her mind, the spaces between her thoughts. The temperature drops suddenly, and Mira feels a chill run through her, as though the air itself is resisting her existence. Her reflection in the darkened window flickers. Adrian's face, contorted with rage, replaces hers for a moment before returning to her own blank expression. Scene 2. The unraveling world. A distorted reality. Mira begins to feel the walls closing in around her. The apartment, once her domain, seems to warp, stretching unnaturally, as if reality itself is bending, stretching under her will. The floor tilts slightly, and the walls pulse like they're breathing. She tries to take a step forward, but her feet feel heavy, sluggish, as though the ground is pulling her back. The glass of the windows shatters, not with the sound of breaking, but with a sickening, wet squelch, like skin tearing open. Mira watches in disbelief as the glass breaks apart into black liquid that drips onto the floor, pooling and spreading in odd, unnatural shapes. Mira's power is slipping. She gasps, her eyes widening. She feels an overwhelming sense of vertigo, as though she's losing her grasp on reality, as if something is slipping away, something that holds her together. Her control, her power, has always been fragile, but this is something far worse. Something inside the very fabric of the world she's shaped is tearing apart, and it's all because of her. The shadows shift again, this time with a more purposeful, malevolent movement. They writhe and coil around her, crawling up her legs, up her arms, crawling toward her chest like hungry creatures seeking to devour her. She slaps at them, but they don't retreat. They pull her in, dragging her into a place that isn't real, a place that feels more like a nightmare than the world she's created. Scene 3. Confronting the void. Adrian's final struggle. The voices intensify, growing louder, more insistent. Mira staggers backward, her heart racing. The apartment seems to fold into itself, collapsing into the very walls, as if the space itself is turning against her. The whispers become shouts, relentless, deafening. "Mira!" Adrian's voice breaks through, clearer than ever. "You never understood. You never knew what you were creating." Her vision blurs, the room spinning as the weight of Adrian's words crushes her. She stumbles, clutching her head in agony, trying to block out his voice. But it's inside her now, inside her very soul, tearing through the walls she's built around herself. "No!" she screams, her voice breaking. "I am not you. I am me." But as the words leave her mouth, she feels the truth, bitter and suffocating, settle into her chest. She isn't just a reflection of Adrian. She isn't just an extension of him. She is him. She has become the very thing she sought to erase, the final unraveling of Mira's identity. The apartment around her twists, contorts. Adrian's face appears in the shattered windows, in the reflections of the broken mirrors, his eyes wide with terror, pleading with her. "You are mine, Mira. You always were." Mira stumbles backward, tripping over the edges of the warping floor. She crashes to the ground, but the shadows around her rise, curling like tendrils of dark smoke, wrapping around her, pulling her into an abyss of nothingness. She can feel the weight of Adrian's existence, crushing her, absorbing her, and then everything goes dark. Scene 4. The hollow abyss. A distant awakening. When Mira opens her eyes, she is not in her apartment. She is not anywhere. The world is gone. She is floating in a void, endless, black, and suffocating. There is no ground beneath her, no walls to cling to. There is only emptiness. But in the distance, there is a flicker of light, a tiny, distant star that seems to call her name. "Mira!" Adrian's voice echoes in the distance, distant yet impossibly close, reverberating through the darkness. She can feel him, not physically, but as if his presence is embedded in the very air around her. The void is filled with his voice, his words, his pain, the void and the hunger. She feels it now. The hunger, not just her own, but something deeper, something primal. It is Adrian's hunger, his pain, his fear, all wrapped together in a single, overwhelming force. She realizes with growing terror that they are the same. He is her. She is him. "No," Mira whispers, her voice shaking. "I am not you. I can't be." But it is too late. Adrian's truth. The darkness around her presses in, filling her with a sense of dread so intense that it feels like it's choking her. The light in the distance flickers, casting long shadows across the abyss. It is not a star. It is a reflection of her, of the person she used to be, before Adrian consumed her entirely. Mira, Adrian's voice says again, a whisper now, like a sigh of wind. You were never meant to exist. You were never meant to be. You are nothing. The light grows brighter, and the shadows seem to stretch out, pulling Mira closer to the center of the void. She tries to scream, but no sound comes out. She is suffocating, drowning in the nothingness. The emptiness fills her, taking everything. There is no escape. Scene 5. The final revelation. The truth of the void. Mira feels herself slipping further into the void, the darkness closing in on her, devouring everything. The light is almost within reach now, but as she nears it, she realizes what it is. It's not salvation. It's not freedom. It is her. She is the light. She is the void. She is both the beginning and the end. Adrian's voice becomes clearer. Not just a whisper now, but a cry of anguish. We are one, Mira. We always have been. And we always will be. Mira's body trembles, and for the first time since she was born, she understands. The hunger, the need to consume, the endless craving. It is not just her creation, it is her nature. She is both the predator and the prey. She has always been a part of Adrian, and now she is nothing but a reflection of his fear and pain, endlessly consuming herself. She reaches out, her fingers stretching toward the light, but as they touch it, it fades, pulling away into the darkness. Her heart stops, and in that final moment of clarity, Mira realizes the truth. She is both the end and the beginning. And the cycle will never end. It will continue forever. Chapter Summary. In Chapter 10, Mira's triumph is revealed to be hollow, as she grapples with the terrifying realization that she has not simply consumed Adrian, she has become him. Trapped in a void where reality and identity dissolve, Mira is forced to confront the horrors of her existence and the unyielding hunger that binds her to Adrian's soul. The world she created begins to unravel, and in the end, Mira understands that she is not free. She is trapped in an eternal cycle of consumption and decay. The chapter explores themes of identity, the inescapability of one's true nature, and the horror of being consumed by the very thing you sought to control.